and welcome, and thank you everybody for coming. So, in this series on community landscapes, top down, bottom up, our first talk was based in Sweden with an informative history and analysis of 20th century public housing layouts, access, and changes over time, which seem to have involved increasingly poorer decision making. And I don't understand why that is, and it can't just be about money. I think there was a detailed look at 1930s housing development on the outskirts of Malmo, which was refurbished in the 1990s with block by block consultation with residents. There was a lovely link there with Anne-Sophie Hochburg, the landscape architect involved with this scheme, and her work with Ralph Erskine and Jerry Kemp at Biker, which was just perfect, really. The next talk last week was an eye-opener with Helen Brown's review of the rise of volunteers and charitable organisations and the changes in UK legislation associated with EU membership and the decline of public sector landscape architects. And there were some illuminating contributions in the questions session as well. Ian Baggett's talk, Connecting People, Spaces and Places, a Can of Worms or a Lifetime Commitment, has been postponed till April the 10th. And it would be really interesting to see the flip side, insider's view, working directly with the public and things, following on from Helen's talk. For this evening, we told everyone the talk was on Robert Marnock and his work shaping those fabulous late 19th century communal gardens around Notting Hill that should still be used as a basic design principle for all housing, especially where young children and families are to live. However, I got that wrong, and you will be able to see and hear Jan's talk on Robert Marnock on the FOLA website in a month or so's time from our annual symposium. But I'm really pleased we're back in the Netherlands this evening with Jan, of course, to see what our cousins are doing, working as democratic functioning communities driven by environmental principles. So Jan, Dr. Jan Woudstra, is a reader in landscape history and theory at the University of Sheffield. He trained in landscape design, horticulture and conservation and practiced as a landscape architect and historian, involved with such prestigious, important projects, including the restoration of Chiswick House and the Privy Gardens at Hampton Court. He's been teaching part and full-time for 35 years and at the University of Sheffield since 1995. He is driven by a concern for the quality of the built environment. His research activity has aimed to increase knowledge within the landscape profession, which he does by leaps and bounds. And he also wants to challenge perceived notions about landscape design and research. So he's authored and co-authored and edited loads of books. And most recently, this week launched Future Histories, Teaching History in Landscape Schools. So without any more, Jan, over to you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah. Today I'd like to speak about sort of one sort of pioneering project in Culemborg in the center of the Netherlands. I'll move on. Oops. This is interesting. One moment. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. We're talking here from the early 1970s onwards, and one of the main things or the main publications that caused sort of a turn in thinking were these two: the limits to growth by the Club of Rome. And a year later, Small is Beautiful by Schumacher. And both of these have been used by later generations of landscape architects and planners as a basis for a change in thinking. But of course, they were just hitting what was happening already. And that can be shown in the Netherlands, for example, with these 1972 publications, and the founding of an organization called the Kleine Aarde, the Small Earth, which is was and is sort of a Dutch equivalent to the Centre of Alternative Technology in Wales, where when I knew them first, they produced these stenciled publications with lots of drawings and try to encourage different ways of life, self-sufficiency, and more sustainable ways of living, as we would call them now. But of course, the term wasn't being used until sort of the late 1980s. The Kleine Aarde sort of organized, didn't just do publications, it was also a site where they experimented with alternative living. They helped in the development of small housing projects and experimented with energy, different sources of energy, organic gardening. And this has been a sustained sort of success over the last 50 or more years. Another sort of prototype in the ecological development, as we called it in the Netherlands, is Ecolonia in Alphen aan den Rijn, which was a housing development designed by the Belgian architect Lucien Krol. Lucien Krol was a remarkable sort of character. He liked to engage people in design and consulted with them and produced sort of layouts that weren't rectilinear, but had all kinds of sort of movement in the design. And this is the scheme at Ecolonia. So that was a prototype from the late 1980s. And it had its own sort of reed beds for grey water and green roofs, all the things that we now would consider standard within sort of alternative housing. So in this case, the car was still allowed in, but reduced numbers of spaces, so to discourage use, and it's difficult to get into the area by car. So that encourages people to cycle, and which is one of the things that was also greatly promoted by the Kleine Aarde. So this touched on a range of issues. It touched on solar gain, which you see here with these sort of conservatory type extensions. It had some solar panels. It had heat from the water. The water was recycled. So and outdoor life was encouraged. Another sort of pioneer was Sibrand Chalingi. Sibrand Chalingi was a water. Well, yeah, I can say was. I mean, he's retired now. Was a water engineer who looked at how you could reduce runoff and sort of cleanse grey water. So that's what he did in this housing complex, which is referred to as Ecopolis or Ecopolis, as it also referred to. But as you see here, this is not a landscape scheme. This is technologically driven, very effective, where the leftover bits are the play spaces. It's not designed around green spaces or about creating spaces. And but the street is used effectively, and yeah, it is the whole area is car reduced, as they call it. So traffic is at a low point. But the main aspect here is catch all the runoff, all the water from the roofs, and grey water, and that goes into reed beds, and that is cleansed through a clever system, which has been trialed in lots of other places in the Netherlands since. So this is sort of a background to things that had been happening in the Netherlands. So when a new scheme came up in a town called Culemborg, which is just south in the center of the Netherlands, south of the River Rhine, which you see here dominating the picture at the top, which can flood and has been encouraged now in places to do so again. And this is a low-lying area of the so-called Betuwe, that's in between the Rhine and the Maas, or Waal as it is called there. And yeah, this is a historic town, back to Roman days, medieval history, with a market square, and mainly 20th century development around it. And what you see here on the right-hand side is the factories. And the site we're going to talk about is sort of situated here. Well, it is always good to get your sort of sources of inspiration from somewhere else. And when this was being promoted, the sources of inspiration that were quoted were the so-called open building model of Delft University. So they looked and they tried to develop new development models that were co-owned and co-made, and that recognized the need to adapt. Another inspiration that was quoted by those initiating this development or a new development at Culemborg was the International Forum Man and Architecture, which was being funded by the ING Bank, which is here in the background, which was built in the early 1990s as a sort of green model based on Rudolf Steiner, and anthroposophic architecture as a model for new offices, which contained lots of plants inside and windows that you could open. And yeah, it was at the time it was the peak. And there was someone there who was very sympathetic, who funded this organization, International Forum Man and Architecture, that encourages and recognizes and communicates research about the creation and appreciation of organic objects and buildings. Steiner is sort of the part of the organic movement. Facilitates a dialogue between architects, designers, artists, and user groups, and they offer conferences, seminars, and encourage sort of exchanges in knowledge and experience. And they got exhibitions, and they sort of look out for schools and institutions that might help and sort of co-produce their principles. So this is a very generous offer, and one that, various organizations sort of called on. Well, another aspect in the Netherlands was the Society for Integral Biological Architecture, which had started in the 1960s. And saw man as the center, the living being that, and as a basis to learn from life, and natural principles as a basis for a healthy architecture, as they called it. And they encouraged what I would now translate as sustainable management of the earth, um, and um, and social and spatial well-being of people, and is integrated and ethical. I mean, nowadays you would say systems. Um, and then finally, sort of the thing that it was quoted, it wasn't the kleine aarde, it was the notion of permaculture that came from Tasmania in the late 1970s onwards by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and where trees form the canopy, light tree cover, and then where crops are grown underneath trees, enabling a permanent sort of agriculture. So, and it looks after people. It sets limits to population and consumption, as in fact, had been suggested by the Club of Rome. Well, the Brundtland Report of 1987 was the turning point. That's when governments became actively involved, and that's when we now say that ecological movement sort of started. Of course, I've just shown you that it was already there, and that it had its beginnings in different routes. But yeah. And the Netherlands started with that and wanted to be seen as a world leader in the early 2000s. And they had produced, or up to the 2000s, and they had produced a sort of an environmental framework. With that is also an ecological framework, etc., etc. And all these concepts sort of developed and evolved over time. So initially they had this theme, choose or lose, yeah, and look at local and global issues, looked at the notion of risk and how that could be met. And as you realize, in the Netherlands, one of the great risks is flooding. And the second of these reports looked at the how to accelerate the ideas on change, and then at costs, and then the environment as standard. Yeah, that's in 1994, sort of a engagement which shifts of norms and self-regulation, which is being encouraged. So within that context, new models were developed, and this notion of the people, planet, profit framework was one of the main ones. In order to create a sustainable and environmental friendly society, and involve the general public with these global and social issues. So the new paradigm was business and profitability, not at expense of society and environment. Business is to think beyond the bottom line, and not just profits, but also the positive outcomes. So it was all in favor of long-term sustainability and a more equitable, sort of healthy future. Great. So how do we do that? And the plot which we're looking at is sort of this plot here, which was a swimming pool. Here's the station, and here is the historic town of Culemborg with an extension, and then all that what you see here is sort of 20th century, and here, yeah, late 20th, early 21st century. So uh, uh, Culemborg sort of enabled this to do. All this land was owned by the council. This was a farm, a small farm, and here swimming pool and some orchards with a water tower and fields. So that was proposed for development. So the development took place in this area, and there was one person who took this up. Marleen Kaptein. She was the facilitator of the whole process. She was employed by the EVA organization, which I talked about earlier, and took this on as her life's project, basically. She developed the concept of integrated ecology, and architecture guided by the landscape, integration of living, working, and recreation, sustainable water and energy supply, reduced use of the car, and ecological building materials, involvement of future inhabitants, and education and advice, all that. And with that, the people she employed to advise her were all those who subscribe to what in England we refer to as the organic, but on the continent, the anthroposophic movement, the Rudolf Steiner movement, which sort of looks at the spiritual world, accessible beyond the human experience, and has got a school of architecture associated with it, as well as agriculture, and was sort of taken in by employment or helping Marleen Kaptein, and that was Joachim Eble, architects, and Copijn, landscape architects. Oops, sorry. Yeah. So we're looking at this area and how that came to be developed over time. So this is Marleen Kaptein. And she has remained involved for 30 years or so. And she sort of initiated this co-production as it became fashionable in the 1990s. And she involved future residents. So anyone who thought they might want to live in an area like this, she called out, and in the participation of the planning and in the design phase, so for the master plan. There was surveys done of personal requirements, which evolved in a process that developed 6 different building types, and started small with initial phase of 55 houses, and they discussed sort of the design of communal gardens and private development of what they called special projects, and affordable rented accommodation with a choice of floor plans. That was also, and then looking at sort of the maintenance of green spaces. Well, the urban concept was conceived as a result of discussions with these potential residents. And there were workshops, excursions, meetings, and design charades. And that's, excursions. And you see those here as well. It basically, this evolved in one scheme that was ultimately then drawn up by the architect and landscape architect. And I'm just going to take you through a few of these plans. It included, of course, this was given as the basic information as basically a survey. One of the things of this housing development was that this was a very important area for water collection and use. So this water is used as drinking water, and that had to be sort of retained within the housing development. But as you see, this is in a river valley, but there is quite a variation in different conditions within that site, which provided different possibilities and opportunities. So there was the notion of having to provide an ecological corridor, which is part of the national ecological framework and getting nature into cities. So these are the landscape architect's drawings. And at the top here, you see one of the sort of water connectors. And then on top of that, sort of after discussion, there was a concept for development. What would you want? What would be possible? What could be used for housing? And what is for businesses? And what is for special occasions? The green is for special occasions. The blue is for businesses. And if you note earlier on, I showed you a picture, and these up to here, this is all sort of businesses. So this linked in, but also it provided the connection here through with the area, and then that evolved into further plans as to how to realize this, what to do, the best position for solar gain, and how to organize and orient the houses and other buildings, and connect with private green space and where to create that, to create a gradual transition from private to communal, so that these communal spaces, public green spaces, and then this drinking water production area, as it is called, and which is combined with a natural zone, which lies right in the center. So that is what was being done. And then the farm was turned into a community farm. That was immediately retained and could be evolved into an organic farm, an outfit, and social facility where education takes place, which is used for social purposes, for mentally and physically handicapped sort of worker, and then the main housing development consists of these courtyards, these communal courtyards within a public landscape, and but where the cars are kept away to the edge. So the cars are kept away sort of to the edge here, and so not on site. And these are some of these courtyards that were being created. And these were all done by the people themselves. There was an orchard in the center, and that was initially used as a staging post. And then, this is the urban farm as we see it. So you can see it's got all the facilities, and the greenhouses were in fact there. So they have been continued to be used, and are now very much part of that communal facility. Well, the water concept consisted out of sort of areas where water would be percolating into the soil and drawn out. There was also there were separate sewage systems. So there's grey water where that is it goes into reed beds, and black water which goes into a biogas plant which provides heat. So here's this filtration, this reed beds, and this is next to the businesses. So and this has continued to work extremely well. Yeah, so drinking water is produced here by Vitens, which is the local sort of organization. So yeah, sort of they created a separate household water system, and it yeah, as I said, it generates heating and cooling of buildings and creates an ecological habitat. Um, they excavated the old riverbeds, and they sort of became the main retention. Uh, Increased the retention of surface water, and created the naturalistic zones. The biogas plant was also a test case for this kind of scale, and that sort of yeah was used as an exemplar of a decentralized energy production. So that this solar energy is caught here. It is there's insulation, there's reuse of heat, and there are there's um, it's a collective water system that uses the groundwater and it uses biogas. So it is an extremely efficient system that's been very effective. So there is, in order to be able to take this into execution, a residential organization was created, which which you join if you want to live here, and provides a life choice, or a way of life, you might say. And they have got sort of newsletters, there are meetings, there are working groups for different aspects, and looking after the fabric. So there is residential participation. There's a city farm is also, and you can become a board member of this and be in charge, or as you would call it here, a trustee, and be very much part of this. So it also enabled this organization to allow and facilitate private building initiatives, i.e. private developments within that on a small scale, not viable within other sort of situations, and all with the aim to provide sustainable sort of architecture. Well, communal areas and communal buildings were all produced by the community themselves. They made their own bricks from the clay, from the lakes, and that were or the lake bed, which is dug out, and then this was sort of produced, and it was all done in a very sort of convivial manner, with music and play along the side, and playing with building materials, with clay. This was a very sort of way in which co-production was being sort of encouraged. And then these courtyards, which were created by each courtyard has got its own sort of working group, and they organize and facilitate the courtyards. They have got their regular sort of summer events and joint meals, And yeah, just to show you some of the this is the layout as it's evolved over time. Here you see the car park, which is on the edge. You leave your car behind and then you walk to your house, um, or you cycle, or you walk to the station directly. Car use isn't really necessary. There's also shared use. This area, I've been told, has been provided last year with a solar roof to gain the energy to recharge the electrical cars that have been bought communally and can be used and booked whenever. So yeah, so this is sort of the car park at the edge. And then there's one little car park inside, which is at the um, uh, old people's home, as I may call it, and all built in a sustainable manner according to sort of the same principles. And here, just to give you some views, this is from a private garden. You look into the communal space. Here you see the entrance to the communal space. And yeah, which was all planted up by the different groups, the different courtyards of people. And then the courtyards, which are all different as a result of different requirements. And they pride themselves on these differences. And this is the communal area with the water reservoirs. And there is, of course, plenty of water for play. And it's great to see kids, sort of all running free. And there's composting facilities, recycle facilities, all integrated within these sort of courtyards. And here you see a group that produced their own bricks and created a garden inspired by Louis Leroy, sort of an alternative way of thinking about nature and encouraging nature in the urban environment. And yeah, here you see sort of it during the very early spring. Kids are out. It is it all works. Summer, it is always sort of animated, I might say, and very green. This is it last year, no, the year before last. So this shows you the sort of the through these courtyards, you've got one path which actually reaches the back of these houses. And there's a little library. You see someone sitting here reading a book under a tree. And it has become very lush and green. Recycling facilities at the back. And play, evidence of play. Between the private and the communal. And you see the sort of the arrangement of the bicycles at the back, and always available. So it encourages the use of the bike rather than, walking to your car, you pick the bike and you cycle into town and you do your shopping and you come back. Ideal. And here, one of the houses, this is from I'll go again the back. But here you see a house that has been adapted for solar gain. And the connection from the house with the private garden and then into the communal area in the background. So this is basically what we sort of looked at, these communal courtyards, these paths which run through there, and one side longer gardens, the other side shorter gardens. These have got larger front gardens or back gardens, back gardens which come onto the water body. And this is the way these sort of courtyards have been organized. All this, the latest technologies are being used. Things have been changing over the years as well. But it is an extremely beautiful environment as well as sort of lush and sustainable. So and new ways of all different types of building have been sort of admitted, experimental, to be as sustainable as possible. And no water comes off the site. So all sewage water is recycled and on the site and released. So it is from that point of view, and no additional heating required. Recycling takes place on the site with bins. There's compost bins as well, and an extremely beautiful and green environment with lots of vegetation that provides a very calming effect, and lots of interest for kids as well as grown-ups, and an environment that is enjoyed, lived in, and where people talk to each other, and where there seems to be a very good sort of atmosphere. So I just thought I show you some of these photographs which show the development over the 20 years or so that I've visited the site. The school here in the center, no fences, everything linked, and quite homely. And then the businesses on the edge, which are also sort of intimately connected with the reed beds. And this is an earth-covered building, a slightly different type, but overlooking the landscape. And here again, sort of one that gathers a lot of solar energy and is set within sort of or alongside the reed beds. And then the most recent addition, which I've seen here, and which is the latest fashion, is the so-called tiny house. I think I would need at least a series of 3 of those in order to get rid of my books. But for those who want to do and live the minimal life, there are those opportunities as well. Houses that don't need any outside energy have got their own sort of solar gain, electrical panels, and batteries, and one can live without having to do or having to use any other resources. So this provides sort of a little bit of evidence of a scheme that has been and has become an exemplar in sustainable living. There are a lot of publications. I've just highlighted 3 here, which you can copy and click, and then but there are lots of other publications. You've just got to type in EVA Lanxmeer, and you'll find plenty to entertain you. So I stop sharing here and we'll open up for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you very much. My cynical nature sounds almost too good to be true, but we'll get onto that later. Before I look at the questions in the chat, can I just ask one? The series is subtitled "Top Down" or "Bottom Up."
Yeah.
What's your answer to that question?
Well, this is clearly bottom up. Yeah. So this is an example of bottom-up, a bottom-up approach of what is referred to as co-production. So doing it together, and even the management has been of the area of the communal space of the public spaces has been kept by the community, but they receive funds which would normally be spent by the council. But it is decided democratically how these spaces are being managed. So it is, this is an example of bottom up, and perhaps I haven't clarified that enough, but this should sort of suffice on that one. I mean, I think I've illustrated it with the examples.
That, in fact, leads very, very nicely into Jonathan's question, which is, thank you for this talk. As it was a communal project, how was it funded?
Well, this was funded. The council enabled this development to take place on land that they owned. So the land was bought by the council, and different organizations bought bits of land that they developed. So, and some of these bodies that clubbed together were these combined people. Others areas are social housing, so they're rented accommodation, and that continues to be owned by the council. So there are different forms of ownership, all related to the different building types that have been put up and have been allowed, and but it's all submitted to a central committee, which then agrees on suitable development for that particular site.
Thanks, Jan. Let's follow up to that. Peter says, how influential has the development been as an exemplar for other mixed developments in the last 20 years? I.e., has it become more and more common to use this model?
Well, there are not many people like Marleen Kaptein who are willing to dedicate their whole professional career to one project. If we had a few more of those, then this would have happened a lot more. But saying that, the site has sparked off similar types of development. Most of them aren't as big as this. And it has also been an exemplar internationally. It has been visited by people from all parts of the world. And there is lots of literature about it, even in English. There is, and different aspects have been studied, and which has been encouraged by the EVA organization. It looks at societal issues, it looks at technical issues, it looks at heating. So the PhDs, their master's thesis, which you can all find online, and whatever topic, most of it is available in English. So and that has encouraged sort of it being well known, and encouraged others to take similar steps. But what we also know is that since this was done in the 1990s, when there was plenty of money, the 2000s, we've seen sort of cutbacks, not just in this country, but everywhere. And 2008 was a disaster, of course. And that has had its repercussions on developments like this, because they are more expensive, not if you look at it on the indirect term, but they require people's time. They require, in the end, cost is there. I mean, even though these people who have bought a house there now or in the 1990s would have done very well by it if they would sell it now. I mean, it has become an extremely desirable area. And there's a waiting list for people wanting to move here. So there is obviously demand. There is not enough supply of this type of housing. So we're waiting for more projects. But unfortunately, a lot of these developments aren't being sort of encouraged effectively by governments. Governments have become weaker. in promoting this kind of development, really. Yeah.
That's a very interesting and very complex answer to that question. And I think just going back to my own question earlier on, I asked how embedded is this type of thinking in the current attitudes of the person in the street. It's not a simple answer, is it? I mean, but again, if it was made easier, would it be a very easy to continue to spread this sort of thing? Is it something that your average Netherlander wants to see more of, approves of, is gunning for?
Well, I mean, this is a self-selected group of people who have decided, to live in this manner, and that they want to live like this. And that group is growing. But I also know that there are some people who say this is not neat and tidy. Yeah, and it isn't. It is sort of a naturalistic environment, you might call it. But this function, it's all important part of that functioning of the area, technically as well as socially. So yeah, I mean, I would very much like to promote this a lot further than it has been. But I also know that a lot of people will find this untidy and wouldn't want to live here, and they would want to live with their car. Yeah, and you can't here.
And that's almost a relief to hear, because I was beginning to think the Dutch, I'm sorry, I mustn't call you the Dutch, the people in the Netherlands were ecologically perfect. And it's good to hear that we're not so far behind in that trend, that we do find sustainable planting untidy. It's not uncommon in this country, is it? Though I think Helen Brown, it shows how a strong design, ecological and social concept can be so influential and flexible over time. It can and it can't, I suppose. People do come back on the answers that me voicing your questions receiving, and do feel free to unmute and ask your questions yourselves. Just moving on for the moment, Tim says, did the council impose conditions after providing money? Was additional funding given above that given to other developments? Good questions.
Well, I haven't really followed what Culemborg has been doing, but it is quite normal. Well, what happens in most instances, what's happened is that a council produces a master plan, and then builders are invited to tender for particular projects. And so it isn't given over to a developer and say, well, okay, what can you do with this? I buy this site, and what can I do with it? No, that's not the way it works. The council has got a very strong say in the general plan. So that's not left to the builder in order to maximize the profits, but it's left on other principles, which is basically whether it functions ecologically, which if you don't do that in the Netherlands, then you're down for a disaster. The sea level is rising by several millimeters per year. The dikes have just been raised, but there's so much pressure on the seacoast that the water is coming in, about 35 salt water is coming in under the pressure 35 kilometers inland. So they have got a massive problem, so the more water you can retain, the more pressure you can retain on your land, the better it is in order to be able to continue to live there. So there are all these sort of little pressures which need consideration.
It is interesting that the love of the bottom line in financial terms is perhaps rather easier to twist when you've got that very practical threat of rising sea level. Alison asks, Cannock Mill is a development in England that has had some press this week, led by some passionate people. It was bottom up and the landscape is managed by the community, but the houses are expensive and it hasn't been possible to offer rented accommodation. Have you got any thoughts on that, Jan? I mean, it's a comment rather than a question, but is that an issue that you see in the Netherlands?
I mean, everything has become a lot more expensive over the last sort of 4 years. Prices have really gone up and then went down last year, and then they're going up massively again now. So things have recovered.
Are they going up more massively than they are in the UK?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, it's much more, but rented accommodation is controlled. So rents are controlled, so they are affordable, and you cannot charge more than a particular rent. If you do so, you can be fined. So there are regulations that are sort of followed, and you can't cheat the system, or very difficult to cheat the system here. Everyone is dealt with in an equal manner. That's the idea. That everyone has got equal opportunities. And it's more democratic, I would say, than the process here.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Peter asks, has a legacy strategy been set out by Marleen for when she dies? I.e., how does one avoid the danger that decision-making becomes more administratively heavy-handed once the visionary pioneer is lost?
Well, she has stepped back. She's 44, so she is now in her 70s as well, isn't she? So she stepped back, and it is being left to the. There's one board for the whole area, and then these different groups of management groups, which all link up to the big one. So everyone is involved, and you've signed up by living there. You've signed up to accepting the way things have been organized. So I think it's pretty well embedded. I mean, I hope to be able to continue to look at it for the next 20 years and sort of see how things evolve. It's always interesting. But the Kleine Aarde, that first project, which I haven't revisited it, but it's still going, and I ought to revisit it to see what it is like now and what the houses are like. At the time, they were very experimental and homemade. But they've been sort of renewed over time and reinvigorated and with more technology incorporated. And that's a way in which they aim to sort of run this project. There ought to be more projects like this, but whether that's going to, it depends on more Marleens, really.
Yeah. I could see that, and we could do that inspiration too. Anybody else got any more questions? Please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. I can probably keep talking while you type. I think it is about inspiration and creating new opportunities that work, isn't it? That others can then. I can remember in local authority where I used to live, everyone went on to look at play streets and keeping the car out and things like that. So please keep on giving us those good examples. I think we've probably exhausted our queries, if you're sure, everybody. But Jan, thank you so much. That was a real challenging, discursive illustration of what you Dutch can do, and do, I suppose, remarkably well. I'd love to come and see it myself, and I keep thinking that can't possibly work. It's too perfect. It's too good. But obviously it does work, and I'm very grateful for you for sharing that with us. So,
well,
thank you very much.
one of the main things really is the fact that it has been linked with education and research, and that is also, it's kept money coming into the project and new ideas, which are all of benefit for others then to learn from. So, yeah, do go and visit. It's a very welcoming environment, and yeah, people sort of do invite you in to come and see their houses, that kind of stuff. If you wage your camera and you don't look like you're just about to rob them, then they're very welcoming. So yeah.
Well, that's a brilliant way to end. Thank you very much. We'll all be over in a few days, okay? We'll all be there.
Cheers.
Thanks very much, everybody. If you want to unmute and give Jan a round of applause, please feel free.